what did you think about the game? And do you feel that this is the end of the 49ers dominant dynasty?
Well, it was one of the most exciting Super Bowls I can ever remember watching. Obviously, only the second one ever to go into overtime. There was tons of scoring, lots of twists and turns. There was, I would say most of the game, I was not sure who was going to win. But, that Patrick Mahomes guy, he's pretty good at winning, especially, in the playoffs. So I should not have ever doubted him even for a second. And he led the Chiefs to victory. About the 49ers, I think this was probably the best season they will have for a long time because this year was kind of like the perfect storm for them. All of their guys were like playing the best year of their career. They had the right mix of experience and youth. No one really important got injured, like in terms of long term. I know they had a few games without Trent Williams and Christian McCaffrey, but they all came back in time for the playoffs. Also, I think if you look at the 49ers roster, Trent Williams is in his 30s. Christian McCaffrey is going to be 28 by the start of the next season, which is pretty old for an NFL running back. They have a lot of impending free agents. Deshaun Gibson, their starting safety. Chase Young, who they traded a third-round pick for, will probably be franchise tagged. But pretty much all of their depth on the defensive line is also heading into unrestricted free agency this year. Guys like Javon Kinlaw, Clelin Ferrell, players who had a big impact on the 49ers Super Bowl run this year that are probably not going to be on the team next year. So with all of that happening, I still think the 49ers will be a good team next year. But I think this is the beginning of the end for, I don't want to call it a dynasty because they never won anything. And I feel like you have to win Super Bowls to be considered a dynasty, but at least for their stranglehold on the NFC over the past 5 or 6 years or so since their last Super Bowl appearance against the Chiefs. Nick Bosa, I think, is probably close to 30 now. Like, just a lot of key players for them are getting old or hitting unrestricted free agency. And I think this is where you start to see the decline. As long as Shanahan is their coach, they'll always be competitive, but I don't expect them to be as good next year.
Yeah, it was definitely very interesting watching the game because, as you mentioned, it was a very close game. But one thing that I thought was super lacking, especially, as we're talking about the 49ers, was their defense. Their defense just didn't seem to show up in those moments in the game where the team needed them to. And honestly, I think that is what spelled most likely the disaster for the 49ers, especially in that overtime, is really trying to contain the Chiefs. And I remember watching the 49ers this season, and their defense was dominant. They kept them in games, and of course their offense had the weapons, had the people that needed to get the ball into the end zone. But it was really the defense that kind of showed up in a lot of those kind of closer games during the season for them. And so watching the Super Bowl and there was initially, I think in the first half, especially when the 49ers only let the Chiefs score 3 points. Of course, there was a bunch of just fumbles and mishaps, things that, were definitely uncharacteristic from both teams. But the 49ers had a pretty good hold on Patrick Mahomes, a pretty good hold on the offensive capabilities that Casey Fields. And I mean, I think that you're right, Robin, that this could be kind of the focal point for the 49ers for a while now, not only just based on age, but it just really seemed like as the game started to progress further and further into the second half, and of course when the game went into overtime, the defense started to fail in terms of keeping Mahomes locked down. And that was something that I thought was super interesting, especially leading to that overtime final drive that the Chiefs made finally down the field after the 49ers kicked the field goal. Rob, what did you think about that final drive in overtime? Or let's just even break down. What did you think of the overtime, the Super Bowl overtime, not only the rules, but how did you think that unfolded and transpired? Did you agree with that the pick by Shanahan to take the ball first?
No, I think that pick was not a smart decision, and I think it showed that Shanahan really was not aware of the rules that have been put in place. I do like the new rules. I think it makes the game more competitive because each team gets a chance to possess the ball, and I think it'd be really unfortunate if you had a situation like the Chiefs Bills championship game a few years ago, where both quarterbacks are playing out of their mind, and then the flip of a coin decides the game in overtime instead of the best team winning. Obviously, there's still a little bit of luck playing into that because you could get the ball first, go score, the other team can score, and then you can score a third time and win. Which still, it's a little bit of luck that's playing in there, but definitely a bad decision by Kyle Shanahan to, elect to defer. So the most interesting part about overtime to me was that the entire playoffs, the 49ers defense was like terrible in the beginning of the game, but then in the most clutch and important moment, they would come up. That's what happened against the Packers, and that's what happened against the Lions. The Super Bowl, it was the inverse of that. They were great pretty much for the first, second, and third quarters, but then in the most important moment, in the fourth quarter and overtime, they could not do anything. I think that was a really good point you made, that their defense was the weakness that lost them the Super Bowl. Obviously, McCaffrey had the fumble, and there were some other turnover issues there with their offense, but that defense is really what lost them this game. And it was kind of problematic for them the entire regular season. I mean, they had to bring their defensive coordinator down from the box to the sideline because their defense lost them a few games in the middle of the season there. I think their secondary was injured. They lost one of their best safeties. I forget how to say his full name, but their linebackers were healthy. Their corners were healthy. They just couldn't get the job done. I think they've been dominant for so long that they kind of forgot what it's like to get punched in the mouth and fight back. And so teams learned, if you can like run the ball right at them and throw the ball right at them and make them pay, they're going to lose confidence. They're not going to play as well. They're not going to be as effective. And I think that's kind of what you saw throughout the second half of the season and in the playoffs with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think you even saw the limitations on Brock Purdy. I know going into this game we had talked about, did he have enough in him to come back, as he had done against the Packers and as he had done in other games where it was close on the line and they found themselves down in the playoffs. But this time they found themselves leading, which was, a little uncharacteristic for the 49ers when it came to the playoffs and those type of games. But I did think that, when the Chiefs finally did stop them in overtime, it really kind of showed that, Brock Purdy has talents and he obviously is going to be a good quarterback in this league. But he's not the perfect guy that, can make something out of nothing when things are on the line. And I think on the other side of the ball, when it comes to the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes was that guy, and he was able to elongate that drive in overtime with not only his legs, and ultimately get them down the field into range and ultimately tossing that touchdown to McCole Hardman. So I think that's where you kind of saw the difference in both quarterbacks, and I think that just kind of begs the question with Patrick Mahomes. We've been saying this, like, don't bet against him in the playoffs. Don't bet against Patrick Mahomes, even despite the season that he had with the offensive struggles and all that stuff. I think the real question on the table right now is, can the Chiefs go back next year and be the first ever team to win 3 consecutive Super Bowls in a row? And I think they absolutely have the ability to do so.
Yeah, I mean, with Mahomes, nothing is impossible, but I think it'll be a lot more difficult next year. And I say that for this reason.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the Chiefs' impending free agents, their entire starting defensive line, minus one guy, I think, is going to be an impending free agent this year. They have a starting corner who's going to be an impending free agent. 2 of their starting linebackers. I'd say 9 out of their 11 starters on defense are hitting free agency, or something close to that. A lot of their depth players are hitting free agency. Their starting left tackles hitting free agency. They have a lot of important players, much more than the 49ers, hitting the free agency this year. And they're definitely not going to be able to keep all of them. So not only do they have to, replenish their wide receiver room this offseason, they're going to have to, fill some of those positions too. And that's going to be really, really difficult to do in one offseason unless they manage to somehow convince most of those players to stay on like a smaller deal for a greater chance of winning another Super Bowl, which is certainly not out of the question, but I still don't think it's likely. Mahomes is probably going to have to do even more with even less next year than he did this year, because there's no way the Chiefs defense is going to be as good. There's no way their offense is going to be able to just score 20 points a game and be successful and win the Super Bowl the way they were able to do this year. So I think the Chiefs' best chance of being, three-peat winners is to build up the offense around Mahomes, because you really cannot hope to have the same defensive performance next year. You have to give Mahomes the weapons to go out there and score a lot of points and be competitive even with an average defense.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, there's definitely still a lot of question marks. And in regards to players returning, I do think that there will be quite a few that do return for that, making history of a three-peat Super Bowl. I think not only that, they're going to attract players that are hitting the free agency market of older guys that are still consecutive in their production offensively, but and defensively wise. But players that maybe haven't had the ability and chance to chase that ring. And imagine being on a roster that could potentially, win the Super Bowl 3 times in a row. That's definitely recognition that, I feel like any player that's wanting to chase that ring would definitely consider in terms of going to a team that has the likelihood of winning again. And honestly, Andy Reid is also one of those guys and one of those coaches in this league that he is one of the top people at his job in terms of coaching a successful franchise. And I think that definitely bodes well for them, in addition to Patrick Mahomes as well. So I don't know, I think it's definitely very likely that they can. But with some of these things happening in terms of players potentially maybe seeking more money rather than a ring or something like that, we might be able to see some movements. Another thing that I wanted to bring up too is with Jim Harbaugh coming to the Chargers, the division that the Chiefs play in is actually probably going to get more competitive. Now, don't know what the Broncos are going to be doing yet, and don't know what the Raiders will be doing. But it looks like the Raiders are probably going to go for a quarterback. I'm guessing maybe in the draft, a young quarterback or signing another veteran, especially with Jimmy Garoppolo getting that 2-game suspension for performance-enhanced drug use, which will only help probably with the team releasing him. But regardless of that, the Chiefs are definitely going to have harder opponents coming into next year, even in terms of their division. Especially when, the other 3 teams in their division this year, they were not stellar all season long. They had their bits and moments, but overall they were works in progress. So we'll see what the Chiefs can do even next season in terms of the gauntlet of even the teams they have to play the division wise twice a year. Thank you for joining us on the Red Zone Rodeo podcast.
If you like football and you like having fun, come on down and subscribe and check out our channel for more videos like this one.
No ifs, ands, or buts. This is the best place for your football news.